Is there a new web in our future? Anil Dash says he thinks there is.
Then what if algorithms are biased? What does that mean for society?
And from CES, a parallel reality emerges. Really?
I'm Alexa Scordato, and this is Future Forward.
I am Steven Rosenbaum. Let us launch. Hey, Alexa, how are you?
Great. I am not sick, but I was sick all week, and so it's good to be healthy in 65-degree weather.
Yeah, well, I am feeling feisty and glad to get through the first week of the new year, and kind of next week is jam packed with all kinds of interesting stuff going on. But I want to just say we're going to get to, as the last block of today's pod, this kind of alternate reality, uh, parallel reality story, which came to us through our friends at IEEE Spectrum, who are an amazing editorial partner, and they are on the ground at CES. We are not. So we will get to that. But let us start at the top of the pod with Anil, and maybe you ought to just explain to our listeners. You have multiple ways into this story, so you should probably talk about that.
Yeah, I do. So, Steve asked me, "What are you thinking about this week?" And in full disclosure, I work at Glitch. I actually work with Anil Dash. He is someone, if you're not familiar with, who has sort of just been an early adopter and in just has kind of had his hands in sort of all these aspects of web culture for many, many years. I feel like I was first aware of Anil as maybe when I was 18 or 19 years old. It's like crazy. And so it's wild because I run marketing at the company called Glitch, which is the company where he's the CEO. So
But he's. I mean, I wrote this down, and then I decided I didn't want to presume to say it in the open. I mean, he's a legend. He's a legend.
he would like cringe hearing
I
that.
It's why I wrote it down and crossed it out. But I mean, whatever came before Web 1.0, and so there's this fabulous life hacker story that tells his journey into tech, and I just always assumed he was a New York tech geek, but no, he was a kid from Pennsylvania. Did not
Kid from
know that.
Pennsylvania, worked in construction, had a stint at the Village Voice. But like, if you read this life hacker piece, which is really fun, it tells a Forrest Gump like journey of one person's journey through tech.
So before we get to his future of the web, talk a little bit about Glitch.
Hmm.
How is it different from all the other plug and play, build a web with a bunch of code pieces products that are kind of floating around out there?
So our mission as a company is to really help enable everyone to uh, create the web in a fast, friendly, and safe way. And those descriptors are really important because I think fast, there's so much that goes into coding. Like if you talk to a developer, it's almost like if you're a non-coder, say it's like, okay, I want you to cook like a Michelin-starred meal. Before you can even think about cooking, you need to like set up the kitchen. And so developers have to basically set up a kitchen before they can even write software. And so Glitch gives you an environment in your browser where you could basically go from idea to code in seconds. So that's like just really cool from a coding standpoint. But I'd say that, we don't want to just be for classic developers. Like we very much intersect between code and culture. And by that, I mean that like people like us, sort of non-developers by trade, so much of what we're trying to inspire is to get people to tinker on the web and to express themselves in a way that I think we used to do. Like I remember whether it's like Neopets or GeoCities or like MySpace even, like there was an aspect of customizing the web that felt possible for most people, and I think we've lost some of that. So Glitch is a community that is all about creating on the web.
And this goes back to Anil's history in the kind of community built web. And I you know I guess it's easy to forget today that there was a period of time when there were no big web companies, you know,
Right.
and and
And
and,
something to
and
know about Glitch too is that it was birthed out of Fog Creek Software, which created Trello and Stack Overflow. And Fog Creek Software was founded by Joel Spolsky, who was one of the first bloggers. So both Joel and Anil share this history of kind of blogging things into existence.
and Anil, there's this great Business Insider piece about him, in which he says that but blogging makes him a better leader, and I thought that was really interesting. Um, and I agree with him, by the way. I mean, it's funny. I've never heard anyone say it as clearly as that. But I mean, I blog every week. I haven't missed a weekly blog post, I think, in 5 years or 7 years. I take it very seriously. I put the time aside. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, but it always helps me clarify my thoughts. It
Yeah,
always does.
it's so interesting because a lot of the CEOs who I think are like OG bloggers, you could say like Jason Fried from Basecamp, 37
Yep.
Signals, or DHH, Matt Mullenweg, WordPress, they actually all prescribe to this too. And there are articles we could pull that where they say things that are related. And it actually totally ties into this notion of remote work and this idea that public artifacts, written content, allows communication to scale. Again, you shouldn't have to rely on live meetings in person to get your thoughts across an organization. There's effective way to sort of beat time zones, and that's actually just writing down your stuff.
Right. So Anil kind of throws out in a bunch of names that I had never really linked together, but he says Wikipedia, Snopes, IMDb, and he's kind of casually saying in the writing, there are these resources that individuals, that small teams built from the ground up, that are need to be cherished and protected, and that there ought to be new generations of them. And I couldn't decide if I thought it was romantic or a warning sign, or maybe both.
It's interesting when I mean it's funny because I see Anil literally every day, but then he published this blog post, and I almost felt like I wanted to just like get coffee or lunch with him to just ask all of these series of questions. Like, did you write this piece because you feel like people forgot? Or it's more about the fact that people aren't even aware that this is happening. And I think it's actually all of the above in the sense that, remember like Web 2.0, right? It was like circa 2007. User generated content was sort of the buzzword, right? UGC. And UGC is still created in mass today. People are still tweeting, they're posting on their Facebook feeds, and people are creating more websites than ever, right? Like the website builder space, Wix, Weebly, WordPress, like there's so many players out there. I just think that it's it's almost seen as like I don't know, like it's not something that we celebrate anymore.
But I also think that it's worth being raising a little bit of a flag here, and I think that it's what Neil's doing, which is, so I think about, Wix and Weebly is a good example, right? So I've done a bunch of companies in the last 2 years, exploring ideas, testing things, and when the bill comes due at the end of, I'm like, oh, I built it on something, and oh, it's going to be another $29 to renew the URL, and then another something. I'm like, yeah, never mind.
Yeah.
And so I know that at some level I'm allowing my history to be erased. But
Right.
but when you look at your, GoDaddy or Network Solutions or Name account, and I have all three,
Hmm.
and every one of them, and by the way, the domain name prices keep going up randomly. So all of a sudden this one is $39 and this one is $27 and this one is $12, and you're like, wait, that's hundreds of dollars to keep essentially abandoned websites alive.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'm like I wonder if the web really does have the same long-term memory that it once did. I think it doesn't.
I would hope it does. I mean, I think there are two factors. One is that we have these closed spaces. So companies like Google and Facebook make it increasingly hard to feel like you have ownership
Yep.
over your content and the web. Um, but the thing that's great is that the ability to create on the web is easier than ever, right? Like there's this whole low code, no code movement, sites like Zapier,
Yep.
right? It's like they say you don't have to program in order to make something. And so it's interesting because in some ways it sounds contradictory, like, oh my gosh, we have this monopoly of a web that we live in, and 7 companies are going to control all the things. But sort of where I don't lose hope, and I feel like there's this digital resistance, is that there are sites that are starting to encourage people like us to actually, express ourselves and make online again. And I think that's part of what Anil is saying. The people's web, like we should actually take control back from these big companies and have this generative, hyper creative, self expressive space, which is what I think drew us into the first place.
So explain to me the People's Web. So this came out December 23rd. So it maybe got lost a little bit in the holiday shutdown, but like, is the People's Web an idea? Is it a movement? Is it a business strategy? I mean, I read the article, but I'd love to hear kind of like what you think it is, or how I mean, you're closer to Anil than certainly than I am.
The people's web for me is just that it there's an aspect of nostalgia to it, which is when we think about the early days of the web, it felt like this blank canvas and this expression of humanity that was so pure. This idea of people, ideas, and community emerging in a way that the physical world, that was like sort of a better version, maybe, of the physical world. And then I think the world of the web that we live in today, most of what we've talked about on this show, at least in the last year, has really been about how the web and technology is actually starting to catalyze the worst of humanity. And so I don't know if people can read the article differently, but for me, the article was really just sort of like a pause, a comma in the middle of a sentence, and really asking people to consider, what is the web that we want? Who are we, the people? Because there's still an opportunity. Like we're at a crossroads where, we can go down the dark side, or we can choose to create and empower ourselves and each other to really create this experience that I think is closer to the one that we imagined.
Yeah, so I really like this paragraph where he ties together IMDb, Stack Overflow, Wikipedia, fandom. I mean, I really like. Snopes. I'd never seen those as all part of a continuum.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
it's really beautiful.
but this is so, to your credit, Steve, like I put you and Anil in the same category of professionals, like, and that category is like purist makers. Like we do this podcast and you tinker all the time, and like you do it in a way that is driven by curiosity, that is driven by expression. I feel like so many people feel like they have to make because there's like a business or something to like scale.
So I'm teaching the Combine Media Accelerator at the NYC Media Lab, and so we had our first cohort meeting this week, 2 full days, all day Thursday, all day Friday, and it was so much fun to be able to say essentially what you just said, which is, yes, we want you to build a business. Yes, we want you to have a business strategy, but we want to be intellectually rigorous and thoughtful, and we want the outcomes to be something that you're proud of. But it can't just be I want to get rich, and it can't just be I've got passion and I want to change the world. It needs to be this complicated mix of passion and drive and business strategy, and it's fun to see in the eyes of we have 7 teams, and they arrive with all of this ambition, and you have to filter it and focus it so that the outcome is something that scales.
Right.
And I said standing in the front of this room, in front of these kind of very wide-eyed but passionate people, I said, look, I'm going to share with you some scar tissue, not because I want to scare you, but because you should make new mistakes. Like, here's a mistake you're going to make if I don't tell you about it, because I made it and it never changes. And it was fun. I mean, I came away a little exhausted. It was 2 intense days, but you're right. I mean, and we'll talk at another point about
We should do
the
another show
yeah
about that.
the,
Like,
the,
I'm so curious what those lessons are.
the Media Lab is off to an amazing 2020 year. All right, so with the idea of the people's web now floating in our pod space, let's move to this concern about AI and bias, because I think in some ways it's the other side of that story, which is technology replacing humans. And some of the data was, I mean, you brought it up, and I thought I knew a little bit about it, but just maybe start by just explaining, what does it mean that an AI could be in some ways biased?
So when we think about software, it's built by people. And so an algorithm is a program that is recommending something, identifying something, and it's using lots of data to do that. And so I feel like this is probably one of the more critical aspects of technology to evaluate, because algorithms are pervasive. And so when we think about Google image search and identifying like a photo, um, it's like there are great use cases to it, but it's also incredibly harmful when these algorithms have a bias and exposes vulnerability that's like harmful to society. And so like um, I don't know. I'll pause there
Yeah.
because I'm curious if that resonates with you as like a summary of this.
So, you know, I know nothing about what the National Institute of Standards and Technology is, NIST. It's a federal organization. I only have one experience with them that we won't get into on this podcast today because it was a little weird. Um, but a federal study came out on December 20th, again in the gaping maw that was 2 weeks of radio silence for the holiday season, which made me wonder why you'd release it then, because that was clearly a decision. Um, and NIST said they found empirical evidence that characters such as age, gender, and race impact the accuracy for the majority of algorithms.
Hmm.
Um, and when you say algorithms are coded by people, like, is the subtext of that white men are teaching algorithms to recognize and identify other white men?
I mean, I don't know if it's as overt as that, but it's definitely a consequence of it. And so if you look in the data, that identifying middle-aged white men had more accurate results than people of color.
So let's just get into that for a second. So tell me the bad thing that could happen if people of color are underrepresented in an AI algorithmic search. What would happen?
So you can imagine that, I don't know, say there's a crime and then there's a database referenced, and uh, you know, the and then you can have basically a bunch of people falsely accused of something they didn't do.
So you're saying if the camera captures a white guy in the deli robbing the deli, it's more likely to find the right white guy, whereas the algorithm could say, here are 30 black people that it might be, and then the police go and rouse 30 black people.
Yep.
Okay, just so we don't blow by that, that's fucking terrible.
Yeah, it's fucked up.
Yeah, that's really terrible. So alternately though, could it also have impact for, you know, every single thing we pay for has some algorithm operating in the background, insurance rates or health insurance or car insurance, or, does all of that data start to get skewed and become less accurate for people whose faces the AI doesn't discover well?
Yeah, I mean, let's even getting away from the facial recognition part. There was a story with the Apple Card recently on Twitter. DHH, who was the CTO of Basecamp and the founder of Ruby on Rails, he was basically saying that like he and his wife both applied for the Apple Card, and
Yeah.
and his wife had like a lower credit line than he did, and he's like, WTF? Like we are the same person, we have the same history. If anything, like she's, I don't know, whatever factors like should make her like she's the one with purchasing power, etc. Um, yeah, so it's an example of there is some database that basically said that, maybe women are not as responsible financially.
All right, so let me just read you another chunk from this Verge article. African American women were inaccurately identified frequently in one-to-many searches, while Asians, African Americans, Native Americans, and Pacific Islanders were all misidentified in one-to-one searches. Children and the elderly were also falsely identified more. In some cases, Asians and African Americans were misidentified as much as 100 times more than white men.
Yeah, think about the disparity in that.
So all right, let me play devil's advocate though. Isn't this just a data set problem? Like the one thing I know from working with technologists is the way you solve that theoretically is you just get more faces of Native Americans, you get more faces of African Americans, you put it into the data set, and then over time the AI gets smarter and it does a better job, right? No?
Yeah, but when we think about like testing different cases and just the nuance of, I don't know, preferences, behavior, attitudes, there's a fundamental flaw in the whole system, which is when the people who are building the software do not represent the constituents or the users who they're serving, then they're going to miss things. So, I mean, you can see that, forget software, you could say even with legislation, right? And this is obviously me exposing my political slant, but like when you look at the majority of legislators being men, then making decisions about women's health and like reproductive health, like that feels bad, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't know the experience firsthand of being a woman. And so you can see how it manifests itself in our laws and legislation. And so take that same analogy and now apply it to software that doesn't just affect a country's legislation, but affects basically billions of people because the internet is online and everywhere.
So let's just kind of put a button on this. Like, what do you think we do to solve it? First of all, you raise it. That's the first thing, is you say to
There's an
developers,
awareness. Yep.
be aware of it. Secondly, it's probably not a legal, it's not a law, right? I mean, making a law that says that AI should be less flawed, probably it.
I think it's like some of it is the scale thing, right? So when we shit on Facebook, right, it's because there is one dominant algorithm in Facebook that is dictating the way content is served. So the consequences of that are obviously issues around, the spreading of fake news. So one thing to combat all of this is just the use case and the application of the algorithms not being so widespread, right? Having sort of like smaller use cases that are like more decentralized or like less one size fits all is probably like one way to counter it. The second is regulation. The third is like a more diverse programming community. Fourth is just consumer education and being more aware of it. There's a lot.
So, one of the things the Verge article nails is that the NIST study actually left Amazon off the list of algorithms they studied, and Amazon has a software called Recognition with a
With
K.
a K.
Yeah, which is a little creepy, which it sells to local police and federal investigators. Didn't know that. Didn't know
I
that.
had no idea. I mean, Amazon continues to like wow me in terms of all the different divisions and things that they're working on.
So Amazon is in the algorithmic face recognition business, which I did not know. And there's the end of the article goes on to say, here's a quote: "What good is it to develop facial analysis technology that is then weaponized, said Joy Busawini, an AI researcher who spearheaded the investigation of recognition bias. The technological considerations cannot be divorced from the social implications. And that, I think, is maybe the point you're making, which is there is social impact to biased AI technology.
Yep.
All right. And with that, we have one more story, which will seem a little like a strange pivot. Having said that.
So this blew my mind. So the article talks about this technology coming out of CES and this notion of screens that can actually show personalized content based off of thousands of viewers.
So just to be clear, this is Tekla Perry from IEEE, who was at CES this year, and we talked about her last week as well. This is not VR or AR. It's not goggles. It's not holding your phone up to a sign to get your personalized view. It literally is, you walk up to the sign and the sign says, it's the Delta Airlines information sign, and it says, hello Tekla, welcome to the airport of the future. So it knows who you are, and someone standing right next to you is seeing a sign that welcomes them.
So I don't understand how this works. Do you?
So not only do I not understand how it works, but there are 3 different articles with 3 different people I know wrote, and all were wowed by it. All, it made a lot of noise, but no one explains how the sign. I guess I understand that I vaguely, there are different pixels in the sign, and essentially it can create a different sign depending on who the viewer is, by understanding essentially where you're standing and pointing the colored pixels directly at you. But I don't know how it knows who you are.
Exactly. That's the thing that I don't understand. But when I think about this actually working and what an airport experience of the future could be, I don't know about you, but I don't like waiting in airports, so I do cut it close more often than not. And so there's nothing more stressful than running up to a screen at the airport and you're searching through
the worst,
lists and lists of cities trying to find your gate.
Yeah.
And so when I think about this technology, I'm like, oh, you mean if I just run up to a screen, it's going to show me my city, my flight, my gate?
By the way, yes, but we have to do the appropriate reminder that it is pretty damn Minority Report.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. So as with all this technology that we talk about every week, on one hand, awesome and helpful for Alexa to be able to get to the airport and have the sign say, no, you're 6 minutes away from the gate you need to go to, run. Or no rush, you can have a coffee, your plane's been delayed. Like, that's lovely, and you don't have to go to your phone doesn't have to bleep. I don't know about you, but I'm noticing, like, everyone, like, everywhere I go, particularly at airports, everyone is, like, staring at their phone because they're lost, they need wayfinding, they need to know if they're late, they need to know if their plane's delayed. So the idea of public signage but is there no chance that anyone else will see the secret message? Like, what if it says, hi, Steve Rosenbaum, you're going to gate 23 and there's some creepy stalker person trying to find me and they see my name? I don't know. It's
right. And you just think about all of these things going wrong. Like, what if it's like a personalized health screen and all of a sudden, like, there's a glitch and like you're getting someone else's thing.
Hey, Alexa, you haven't taken your medication. We're concerned about you. Yeah, right. That's creepy. Having said that, they say that it's going to be, where are they launching it? In Detroit.
And apparently it's there. It's live already in Detroit.
No, it says plans to start using the technology in Detroit this summer.
Oh, I thought it said maybe I saw a headline that said that it was like running in Detroit.
Nope. This summer. So maybe this summer we take a little field trip to Detroit and play with the sign.
Oh, we should do a live taping.
A live taping from the Detroit airport. That would be. I'm not sure that's the place I want. In any case, we're out of time. Another fabulous show. I think we should have Anil on the show. That's what I think.
I can make that happen.
I think you've got connections. I know he's very busy, but I think we should have Anil on the show. Until then, have an awesome week. See you next week.
See you, Steve.